Welcome back. There are differences in language learning. There are common mistakes in detecting language learning difficulties. First, assuming that non-school language children are learning disabled. This happens quite often in elementary schools. Assuming that a child who doesn't speak English at home may have a disability, instead of trying to assess the child's knowledge in their home language, and then building on that with a second language learning environment. The second mistake is concluding cause of every bilingual child's learning problem is solely based on their language. Sometimes there is a learning disability. Sometimes there is something where a child needs more assistance in some way. So comprehension of a child's home language, comprehension of child development are both really critical when we're working with and assessing children who have English as a second language. There's some social factors and a language gap. So socioeconomic status, low socioeconomic status families, whether they speak English at home or a second language, will have smaller vocabularies. They'll have simpler vocabularies and shorter sentences because that's what they've been exposed to at home is often smaller vocabularies, simpler vocabularies, and shorter sentences. As families that have lower socioeconomic status are often stretched for time and working multiple jobs and or may not have education themselves. There's correlations with the hippocampus development. Sometimes there's inadequate prenatal care with lower socioeconomic families. Sometimes no breakfast or lead exposure. Children could be living in crowded housing. There could be neighborhood violence. This may exist in children who are bilingual as well as children who are not bilingual. And sometimes there's a mistake made by the assumption that this is what's happening in bilingual families. Beyond the correlation, the home language, the mother's education, if the mother is the one who's primarily spending time with the child, what books the child has, those are the most critical determinants of a child's ability to learn in school, and those are connected to socioeconomic status. There are some expectations that families have based on a child's language skills. If a child comes in speaking a second language, the expectations of the teacher may change. Depending on the language, the teacher may have more or less skill in working with that child as well. The adult, if they have positive expectations, that's related to achievement. So if an adult sees the ability for a child to code switch as a great sign of their flexibility in thinking and draws on that and supports that, children will achieve more in school. Sharing expectations between parents and teachers will also increase performance for children in school achievement as well. Teacher attitudes are the biggest determinant of how well children will do in school, no matter what the issues are, whether it be a child who has ADHD or dyslexia or a child who is learning a second language for the first time. And so a teacher who embraces the idea of a child being bilingual or multilingual has a better chance of supporting a child to succeed in both languages and develop all of the academic skills that they need. So as we've been talking about in last week's discussion, the greatest skill a teacher has is patience and the ability to work with individual children. So numbers and number understanding. At about this time, at 4 to 5 years, children can count to 20 usually. They understand one-to-one correspondence of objects and numbers, which is really important when we're counting, that when I'm pointing to one object, I'm saying one number. That's one example of one-to-one correspondence. Children understand the concept of more and less by the age of 4 or 5 years. They can recognize and name shapes. By 6 years old, children can count to 100. They understand bigger and smaller. They can add and subtract single-digit numbers. By 8 years old, they can add and subtract two-digit numbers, understand simple multiplication and division, and they can understand word problems with two variables. By 10 years old, children can add, subtract, multiply, and divide multi-digit numbers. Children by 10 years old can understand simple fractions, percentages, area, and perimeter of shapes. The more experience they have with concrete objects, like in a block area at a preschool, and playing with those objects, the better this understanding will develop. By 10 years old, children can also understand word problems with 3 variables. By 12 years old, children begin to use abstract concepts such as formulas and algebra. So in reading at about this time, 4 to 5 years old, children understand basic book concepts. For instance, a child learning English and many other languages can understand that books are written from front to back, with print from left to right, and that letters make words that describe pictures. By 4 to 5 years old, they can also recognize letters. Usually their name are the letters they recognize on sight first. They can recognize and spell their own name, usually by 4 to 5 years old. By 6 to 7 years old, they know the sounds of the consonants and vowels, including those that have 2 sounds, like C, G, and O. All of those have different sounds depending on where they are in a word. They can use sounds to figure out words. They can read simple words such as cat, sit, ball, and jump. By 8 years old, they can read simple sentences out loud, 50 words per minute, including words of 2 syllables. They can also understand basic punctuation, consonant-vowel blends, and children by 8 years old can comprehend what is read and describe the story back to you. By 9 to 10 years old, they can read and understand paragraphs and chapters, including advanced punctuation like the colon. They can also answer comprehension questions about concepts as well as facts. Children by 9 to 10 years old can read polysyllabic words like vegetarian and population and multiplication. By 11 to 12 years old, children demonstrate rapid and fluent oral reading, more than 100 words a minute. Vocabulary includes words that have specialized meaning in various fields. For example, in civics, liberties, federal parliament, and environment all have special meanings. They can start to comprehend this. They can comprehend paragraphs about unfamiliar topics. They can sound out new words regarding figuring out the meaning using cognates and contexts, which are parts of the words and how they're related in the sentence. And they start to read more for pleasure. At 13 plus years, children continue to build their vocabulary with greater emphasis on comprehension than on speech, and they can understand more complex textbooks. So teaching and learning, international schooling, cultures vary and differ in what is valued, but there are some age-based goals we all have: reading by elementary school, math at certain levels by certain ages. Educational practices differ between and within nations. The variation is greater in the hidden curriculum. So the hidden curriculum is what is said and done and who it is said and done with. And the hidden curriculum can impact children quite a bit. Same situation, far apart. Think about the hidden curriculum you might see in this picture. The children on the left are reading paperback history books with patriotic themes. The boy on the right is memorizing his holy book. So can you identify the hidden curriculum in these photographs? What are children learning other than learning how to read? What are they learning to believe in? What are they learning to think based on the content of what they are reading? There's been some international testing of learning in schools. Over the past 2 decades, more than 50 nations have participated in at least one massive international test of educational achievement. There are 2 different international achievement test scores that we look at right now: Progress in International Reading Literacy Study, which is the PEARLS, and the Trends in Math and Science Study, the TIMS. In 2015, the Program for International Student Assessment looked at achievement scores in all of these different countries, and you can see them listed there: Singapore, Finland. There's an average in gray: the United States and the Dominican Republic. And so you can see increases over time, and like the Dominican Republic had an increase in higher levels in reading than they did in math and science. And you can see the difference in Singapore, lower in reading and higher in math and science. In the United States, we were lower in math but higher in reading and science. And so there's some information comparing those different countries. So these rankings reveal a few different things. The national and cultural context affect test scores. First, the U.S. ranking has risen over the past 2 decades, but in 2015 there were still 19 nations whose fourth graders surpassed U.S. students. So while our test scores were going up, there were 19 nations who were still doing better than we were. Most developing nations do not give these tests, but when they do, their scores are low. So nations that are not considered industrialized, those developing nations, typically have lower scores. Finland's educational reforms resulted in dramatic ranking increases since 2011. We did notice some gender differences in school performance, and this is related to hidden curriculum. In the Pearls, girls were ahead of boys in verbal skills in every single nation, and boys were ahead of girls in math and science in every single nation. What's interesting about this is what teachers were encouraging in skills in boys and girls, and who they were approaching to do reading and what they were expecting from different children. And this goes all the way back to our gender expectations in preschool that we talked about earlier. The TIMS found that gender differences in math narrowed or disappeared. There was a gendered similarities hypothesis, so it could have been something in the tests themselves. In the classroom, girls have higher grades overall, but their grades dipped in puberty. And there are lots of different reasons why this happens. Some of them are based on gender stereotypes of who is the smart child in the classroom and what's expected of a girl, and some of it is based on the educational systems in middle school. There were some very interesting comparisons, and it's still mostly theories as to why these differences exist. Most of it is theories based on the hidden curriculum in the classroom of what teachers are expecting of children and how they're relating to different groups of children. So a word on ethnic diversity. As of 2014 in the United States, the nation's public schools have become what they call majority-minority. In middle childhood, every child develops cognitively with specifics dependent far more on the individual, their particular experiences than on their ethnic background. Children are ready to learn whatever their social context teaches them. Barring severe impairment, all school-age children can learn a second language, become skilled in math, reading, and writing if taught logically step by step. This has been shown over and over again through research. However, our schools remain highly segregated. There's been improvement in academic performance over the past decades, but there are still gaps between income and ethnic groups from pre-kindergarten to high school. U.S. schools are actually more segregated than they were 4 decades ago. So the average white student attends a school that's 73% white. The average African American student attends a school that's 49% African American. The average Latinx student attends a school that's 57% Latinx. And so these schools are still highly segregated, which impacts the funding of the schools, impacts the support the schools receive, and can impact the education the children are receiving as well. There are 2 national standards that we look at when we think about schooling in the United States: the National Assessment of Educational Progress and Common Core. And there's a lot of debate about which one is best for students. The National Assessment of Educational Progress is an ongoing and nationally representative measure of U.S. children's achievement in reading, mathematics, and other subjects over time, and is nicknamed the nation's report card. Common Core of Standards in 2010 was implemented in many schools in California. Standards were more rigorous than most state standards, and they're quite explicit, with half a dozen or more specific expectations for achievement in each subject for each grade, adopted in a total of 44 states in 2013. There were some choices and complications with Common Core. It was initially favored opposition as the testing increased and implementation began. Education's next findings, the teachers' opposition to Common Core was 12% in 2013 and 40% in 2014. My own mother is an elementary school teacher, and she said Common Core was a great idea at meeting individual children's learning styles until the textbooks publishers got a hold of it and they changed the way that it's used. And you'll see here a picture of a test that a child did, and the question is, Carol read 28 pages of a book on Monday and 103 pages on Tuesday. Is 75 pages a reasonable answer for how many pages Carol read on Tuesday? Then on Monday, explain your answer. Yes, 75 is a reasonable answer because 103 minus 28 equals 75. Seems logical. But the child lost a point because they were supposed to estimate 100 minus 30 by estimating those two numbers, because estimation was what they were learning at that point in time. So even though the child was able to actually do the math, they were graded down because at that point what they were supposed to be doing was estimation. And so this is the type of very confusing application of Common Core which led to higher opposition from teachers. There are 10 controversial issues in education today, and we'll be looking at some of these in discussion, so I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on these. First is public education and public funding priorities. What are we funding and what are our priorities in different areas? The second is the use of vouchers, giving vouchers to parents to pay for their schooling in private schools. Usually this means that the voucher is paying for part of the education and then the parent is paying for the rest of it. And so vouchers don't always work for low-income families. The third is charter schools, schools that are started by parents to teach in a particular way. They may be a charter school based on STEAM, where science, technology, engineering, arts, and math are the focus. They could be an arts-based educational charter school. The fourth is homeschooling, and there's some debate about whether homeschooling is the right environment for children to learn. Public education, the freedom of religion is another one. Whether or not prayer is allowed in school and what type of prayer and when and who gets to lead the prayer. The next one is arts in the curriculum. What is the role of arts in children's learning? And is it a valuable enough commodity that we want to teach art education in the schools and put money into it? The next controversy is second language learning in primary school. How do we do that? Is it bilingual education? Is it immersion into the English language right away? Is it education in the child's home language, bridging to the English later on? All three of those are different models. There's huge controversy on which one makes the most sense. The next controversy is computers in education. What is the role of technology in learning? And is technology an appropriate way for children to learn? And if so, how much of the time should be spent with technology and how much of the time should be spent, as Vygotsky would say, with a more skilled peer or a teacher scaffolding through language, for example. The next one is class sizes. Class sizes are increasing all the time. So can a teacher be as effective with 30 kindergartners as they can be with 20 kindergartners? The final controversy that we look at is the role of soft skills in curriculum. Those skills that allow us to cooperate and collaborate with others, those skills of communication. These are debates every time we look at curriculum within schools. So I want to know what you think. This is one of the questions we have in our discussion this week. There's two other questions as well, one about bilingual education and another one looking at Vygotsky and Piaget and information processing and what type of learning environment you went to school in. So I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.